I welcome back you all to day 2 of our workshop on qualitative research and ATLAS.ti. And I hope you all had a meaningful learning experience yesterday and got a good introduction to the foundation of qualitative research. So today session also going to be much insightful, and also you will learn concept, framework, and practical understanding, which we will implement in upcoming practical session of hands-on on ATLAS.ti. So with that, I would like to give you a quick reminder. Please keep your microphone muted unless the resource person invites you to speak, and feel free to put your question in the chat box. With the course of time, we will address that. And with that, once again, I welcome you all, and I invite Ms. Aditi to take forward the session. Over to
Hi,
you, ma'am.
thank you so much. Thank you. All right. So yeah, like yesterday, preferably we'll take questions towards the end. And of course, I can see a couple of you switched on your cameras, but I'd request if there are others who are able to switch on their cameras, it'll be nice. I see a couple of familiar names here from Bombay and also Dehradun, surprisingly. So, I mean, if it's possible for you, I'll be very happy to interact face to face. But all right, let's just start today. And as I said, we will be doing research methods in particular today. Let me just share my slide. Hold on. Yes. Is this visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, great. All right. So before we begin today's session, very quickly, if some of you can, just help me recollect what all we did yesterday. What were some key takeaways for you yesterday about qualitative research? What do you think qualitative research is? And I encourage if you can actually unmute yourself and speak. What are some of the features of qualitative research? Anything that comes to your mind from yesterday's session? What does qualitative research focus on largely?
Lived and shared experiences of people.
Yes, lived experiences of people, and we also focus on the meanings and interpretations that people attach to the world around them, right? And if you remember, then we also talked about how qualitative research is, based on grounded theory approach largely, where you're basically grounded in your field data and not so much on existing theories. And these are micro studies largely, so we cannot do like the India level qualitative research. It's usually in smaller settings. And of course, the element of having to do research in natural settings. So we usually tend to go to fields, be with the communities or people that we are trying to study, in order to bring out what is called as an emic perspective. EMIC, emic perspective, is basically translates to an insider's perspective. Now, from there, today, let's just get into some of the most basic methods of qualitative research. Now, when you're focusing on this part of data collection in qualitative research and fieldwork, there are broadly three major ways of collecting data. The first is, of course, to see, right, which is observation. And the second is to talk and to listen, which is in-depth interviews. And then third is, of course, to read, which is based on secondary literature, archival data, etc. Now, of these three methods, when we talk about qualitative research and particularly talk of ethnographic studies, the most fundamental of methods is observation, right? Okay. Now, when you talk of observation, as a method, if you want to understand observation, it's best that we should look at observation as a continuum, right? As a range. So On the far left of this continuum is what is called as pure observation. Now, pure observation is a method that's largely used in the natural sciences, where you observe something, say, suppose under a microscope. So you are observing, say, suppose blood samples, or I don't know, certain species of animals under a microscope, right? In the social sciences, when you use pure observation, it's similar to observing people from a one-way mirror, like in case of interrogations, right? I'm sure you would have be aware of how interrogation rooms are. So there are people who are sitting there who are being questioned, and then there are other people who are viewing them or observing them from the other side of the room. Now, another case of pure observation, some of you may have experienced this, that during job interviews or any other interviews, for instance, uh, you might have a person in a room who's just sitting there, not talking to you, not asking you questions, only looking at your body language, right? Now, that is again a form of pure observation. So in pure observation, the researcher has no contact or no influence on the people they are studying. At least that's how we believe it to be. That's on the far left. On the far right is what is called as pure participation, and we discussed this yesterday as one of the issues in qualitative research, the issue of going native. Now, here the people become so immersed in their field and with the communities that they are living with that they go native. That means they become the phenomena that they're trying to study. They become the part and parcel of the people that they're trying to study. And what that leads to is, of course, that we lose our analytical bent of mind. So we're no longer able to, as researchers, in an unbiased fashion, lay certain claims about what we've done in the field. And an example of this is what we talked about yesterday, is from the work of Kenneth Good, who studied the Yanomami tribes in the Amazon. Now, participant observation comes in between, right? And this also has variations, right? So you can have participant observation, which is a low participant observation. Say, suppose, I go to my field in the morning and I return back home in the evening, right? I can have a moderate level of participant observation as well, where I decide that I'm going to go and live with the community that I'm studying. And there can be a complete participant observation where temporarily I become part and parcel of the community, but it's not the same as pure participation, right? Now, this is a participant observation between the two extremes. Now, based on the visibility of the researcher, participant observation can also be covert. Covert is when people don't know that you're there in the field as a researcher, observing them, studying them, etc. And the other is, of course, overt, where you do reveal to your research participants that you are a researcher, you are here for a purpose, you're trying to observe and learn about people, their culture, about certain issues, right? Now, based on this matrix that we have here, there are several ways in which participant observation can be done. Now, for instance, if you have an overt and highly participatory approach, then that's what several of us use in our research. For instance, in my research, because I stayed there for about 3 years in Kullu, and I lived with the people. I participated in their everyday activities, in their festivals, in their events. So it was highly participatory, but it was overt. People knew I was there as a researcher. I was doing my PhD. So my identity was known to them. Similarly, if you have say, a highly participatory but covert research, one of the examples of that is, say, I want to study an organization, a corporate organization maybe. So without revealing my identity to highly, participate in the activities of this organization, I can join as an employee or maybe as an intern, right? That's an example of highly participatory covert participant observation. Now, if you have a covert but highly observational, one of the example that comes to mind is, I could study, say, Hindu culture and traditions by just being an observer in, say, suppose one of its rituals. Say, suppose in a wedding function, I just attend and see what happens. What is the dynamism that unfolds. Now, people don't necessarily need to know what I'm doing there. right? Similarly, for a highly observational and overt participant observation, I could simply be in a field, not interact as much with people, but simply make videos, take photographs of people, of places, of events, etc. Now, these are a couple of broad examples that come to mind. Now, if you have to come to the definition of uh, participant observation is a method in which the researcher takes part in and records the daily activities, rituals, interactions, events, of a group of people. And in this process, what we're trying to do is to learn the explicit and tacit aspects of their lives and their culture. Now, let's just take a minute to break down this definition. One, as I've highlighted here, the researcher is a part and parcel of the entire process, right? The second important element of participant observation is recording. Now, it is mandatory when you're doing participant observation that in some form or the other, you will keep record of your observations. Now, one of the ways of doing this is to maintain what is called as field diaries, field notes, right? And it is suggested that you should maintain your field diaries every day. Every day at the end of your field work, you should come back, sit down, make notes about your observations. The reason is very simple. The more you delay, the more you forget, the more information you lose, right? There are other ways also of recording. You could have, audio-visual records maintained, provided there is permission given to you. Now, what all do you record? You've taken part, and I said recording is important, but what all do you record? As is written here, the daily activities, their rituals, interactions, events, their practices, all of these aspects become important to record. And the reason I'm doing this is to understand what is called as the explicit and the tacit aspects of people's life. Now, explicit is those aspects of our life which we can articulate immediately, right? Whereas tacit are those aspects which I'm not able to articulate, right? Which I've probably not thought about as much in my life. And therefore, as a researcher, it is my responsibility to interpret based on what I see, what I observe, what I get from interviews, etc. Just to give an example of explicit and tacit, again, falling back on my research, I'd say that, when I went to Kulu and I asked, say, suppose people in the village, what the social structure of this village is, or what are the different social categories that the people of this village belong to, that is an explicit part. People can immediately tell me that, okay, we have this category of people living in this village. But a tacit aspect, as I said, is something that people cannot articulate so easily. And for me, one of those aspects was when, because I was working on issues of landscape and conservation, and I wanted to understand what landscape means, what value does a landscape hold for people, what is the meaning that people attach to a landscape. Now, if I directly asked people this question, they were not able to articulate it, right? So for me as a researcher, it became important that through the various stories, the various myths, the various folklore that I could, get hold of, I had to interpret what this meant to them, what the landscape meant to them, right? I hope this is clear. Yeah, everybody's with me?
Yes, it's clear, ma'am.
Okay, great. All right, so moving on, why participant observation? Where is that this particular method becomes important? One of the first uses of participant observation is that it helps you experience the social behavior of people in a natural setting. This is something we've talked about in great detail yesterday. And I said it's the researcher's responsibility to immerse themselves in the field and not take people out of their natural settings, right? And simply because when we do observe people in their natural settings, that's the closest to reality, that's closest to their truth that we can get to, right? The second point where participant observation becomes useful is that it allows us entry into field. Now, for a lot of us, when we are beginning our research, we don't know how to get access into field, in that aspect, beginning with a method like participant observation is quite useful. Now, remember, participant observation is also a very strategic method, and strategic because it allows you to build rapport. Because in continuation to the point of, getting entry into the field, uh, say suppose I do a participant observation exercise of a village meeting. Now, what that participant observation exercise helps me do is that people get to see me, right? They get to know that okay, some researcher is here. They will try and understand me. They will try and judge me, right? They will try and interact. And gradually, what happens over some period of time is that some level of trust starts building up. Now, that is what rapport building is, right? That is what allows us entry into field. That is what allows us to do our research better. Now, the fourth important point about participant observation is that it is very helpful as a method in identifying key informants. Now, how does that happen? Again, say suppose if you are attending a panchayat meeting and you realize that in this meeting there is this one person who's not spoken at all, but their body language is such that you can make out that they wish to speak and they have a lot to share. Nevertheless, in the meeting, they have not spoken. Now, for me as a researcher, that becomes a very interesting case, which I would want to follow up eventually. Say, suppose I'd want to have an in-depth interview with this person, right? Now, this is something that's possible doing participant observation. So when you do participant observation, there'll be several of these cases, unique cases that will emerge, which you can identify as key informants for your subsequent investigation, right? The last part is that it allows flexibility in research. And this is basically also the highlight for participant observation, because for most of us, when we are beginning our research, we don't know what we are supposed to do, how we're going to do it, what questions we have to ask, who do we go and talk to, right? And what participant observation does is because it's so flexible and so broad that it allows us time to gradually build our research from questions to methods to identifying people. It allows us the time and space to build our research gradually. And that's why it's a very, very important tool. And that's why I said it's also the most fundamental tools of qualitative research. Now, moving on, I thought I should also share some of the classic examples of participant observation. And if you do a quick search on internet, you'll see several examples that are there. I've just picked up those that I personally like. Now, the first is Street Corner Society by William Footwhite. And what William Footwhite was trying to do through his study was to understand that why in America at that point of time when this research was being done, when the entire mainstream society was so focused on getting educated and moving up the ladder, there were some boys in this Italian neighborhood who were immigrants, of course, who rejected this system of schooling and didn't go to school, right? And therefore they were called the corner boys. They would gather around these street corners. They had these small gangs and groups, right? And he was trying to understand what is this difference between the college boys versus the corner boys. And he, of course, used participant observation. This was an overt study. So he interacted with these groups and tried to understand, what leads to formation of these groups, what is the dynamics of these groups, how do they operate, etc. Now, that's one classic example which I recommend people can read if you want to learn about how participant observation is done practically. The other fascinating example is by James Patrick. It's called A Glasgow Gang Observed. And James Patrick, some of those would know, but for others is a pseudonym. So this is not the name of the real author. And the reason is because James Patrick was observing a gang. For his own safety, he could not reveal his identity. Now, James Patrick was a teacher in a reform school. That's where he happened to meet this person named Doc. And Doc was a gang leader. So what he did, James Patrick, of course, told him that he was interested in studying the gang culture, etc. And Doc introduced James Patrick to his gang, of which he was the leader. Now, this was a covert study. As I said, James Patrick never revealed his identity, even to the gang members, except for this one gang leader, right? And what happened in this process is, to be accepted as part of this gang, Patrick had to, get or indulge in a lot of activities which were illegal, right? Just to be part of the gang and to be able to get an insider's perspective. And so this gang leader, Doc, would very often protect him because he knew that this is not something that he was up for. And he, of course, protected him, but he also taught him several, ways and means in which he should behave. His body language, certain words, for instance, how to be, how not to be, what things are permissible, what things he cannot say, to be able to ensure that he doesn't get caught, and also that he gets accepted. Now, that's another example of understanding gang culture using participant observation. The third example here is called Black Like Me, and it's by John Howard Griffin. Now, what John Howard Griffin did, he was basically a white journalist in America, from the southern states of America, and he wanted to study racism in his home state. So in order to understand racism firsthand, what he did is he changed the tone of his color, I mean, the tone, skin color, basically, right? So he used certain chemicals, underwent certain procedures such that, his skin color turned black. And after that, he went back to his home states, where, to his surprise, his friends didn't recognize him. So if you can actually see the photo, that's a photo of Griffin itself on that, the book cover, after having done that procedure. And so his friends didn't recognize him. The same buses, the same bus routes that he would usually take, he was harassed. The restaurants that he would go to very often also abused him. They didn't allow him to use washrooms. Abuse was something which is very common. And it's at that point of time, through participating in this home state of his, by adopting this identity of looking like a black person, that he realized how deep entrenched racism was in his home state, which he never otherwise realized up till now. The last interesting case here is by Goffman. Now, Irving Goffman's work on asylums. Now, what Irving Goffman did, again, this is a covert study. Now, what Irving Goffman did, he wanted to understand the world and what people go through inside asylums. And he became a staff member. He joined as an employee in one of the asylums. And in this process of trying to understand what really goes on with patients and people who are admitted to asylums, he realizes how these total institutions like asylums work. So he realized when people are admitted to asylums, they're completely cut off from the rest of the world. And the asylums operate on their own rules and regulations. And instead of this total cutoff from the world, so instead of actually helping people better their mental health conditions, what asylums did is add to their problems. Now, this was a phenomenal study because it helped deinstitutionalize asylums. It was Irving Goffman's work that helped us do away with asylums, right? And of course, subsequently, other forms of institutional support came up. Now, these are some of the classic examples of participant observation, and you will see several more. If you want to study corporate organizations, there are several cases you could look at. The work of Melville Dalton has worked on a factory floor, right? There's several other examples that you can think of. There's another work called The Managed Heart that talks about how this idea of emotional labor and how people have to, in certain industries like the hospitality industry or the aviation industry, for instance, they've looked at what do air hosts and air hostesses have to go through, right? So this is again an observational exercise that was conducted in these cases as well. So there's several examples that you can go through. Now, coming on to how do you observe? Now, how and what do you observe? But first to how do you observe? Now, one of the ways of observation is called mapping the scene. Now, in mapping the scene, as is quite obvious, The first thing that you have to map is to map the physical space. How does this physical space look? How is a place arranged, right? Subsequently, once you've mapped a physical space, the second part is that within this physical space, how are people arranged? That is the second part to mapping the scene. Now, this aspect of mapping the scene, one of the ways to do it is that you take down notes and you document by writing. The other way of mapping the scene is to draw a scene. And this is also called as positional maps. Now, just to give an example of how positional maps work, I very often tell this to my students in this. When the first class begins and new batch of students come in, there is this unknowing tendency that you tend to observe and you create a mental map of how students are distributed in a class, right? Now, I happen to do it. And say, suppose this is the process that happens in the second class also. In the second class, again, there is another mental map that is created in terms of how students are sitting. Now, by the third, fourth, or fifth class, what happens when you start making these mental maps is that even without knowing these students, even without having personally interacted with these students, I am able to, just based on these mental maps, tell who's friends with who doesn't like who, right? Which are the groups that are being already, in formation in a classroom. And, humorously, I also tell them that if there is ever a fight in this class, I would be very sure to tell who is going to stand with who. Right now, this idea of positional maps is something that William Footwhite also used in his study. Now, you can use positional maps in several other contexts. So, for instance, again, going back to, say, suppose a village panchayat meeting, if I'm, say, trying to understand, women's participation in development programs that are being run by panchayats, right? If I'm able to draw a positional map of who is sitting where, how are people placed in a meeting, and from that, if I can identify where women sit, I will be able to give certain insights, certain conclusions about women's participation, right? Similarly, there are other methods that can be used in terms of observation. The second major way of doing observation is called community mapping. I'm sure a lot of you would be aware of this method. It's a participatory method, of course, right? And in this, you map an area along with the community members. So community members are those people who will be guiding you in terms of this mapping process. For example, if I'm trying to do community mapping in a village, I will either, say, walk with community representatives through that entire village, or at least make them sit in one place where collaboratively we're going to, draw on a piece of paper where the houses are distributed, where are the water sources, where is the common ground, etc. Right? Yes, so marginalized communities in the outskirts as well. I'll show you an example of this also. Now, what community mapping helps us do is two things. One is that it helps you identify locational problems, certain geographical issues, right, which of course transcend into the realm of social then. The second is that helps you build rapport. Now, because you are interacting with people, right, that's a very fascinating way of trying to develop rapport, trying to develop intimacy with people. Now, to give you an example of how it helps you identify issues, this is a map. This is from the Dharwad district, and I think this is a study in 1954. Now, this is a mapping that has been done. Now, if you look at the map here, I don't know if you can read it, the index here, but if you look at the map here, what you can see is that the Lingayats is the population that's the most dominant in this village, right? They're also the ones that are at the center of the village, right? Along with, I think, the Brahmins here. But if you look at, say, suppose some other communities, if you say, look at the Muslim population, or if you look at, say, suppose the shepherd population, they're at the periphery, right? They're the outskirts of the village, right? Similarly, if you also add to this map, say, suppose water sources, where are the water sources located? This map will be able to give you a lot of information in terms of, say, suppose access to resources, and how access to resources depends on social hierarchies such as caste or religion, right? You can look here, there are certain shops also which have been identified, which are right at the center of the village, right? Very far from these populations that are living on the periphery. And that's an example of community mapping, which is helping through location, are trying to help you understand the social dynamism in this place, right? Now, the third way of observation is through counting. Now, there is this general notion, as we discussed yesterday as well, that qualitative research is averse to numbers, right? Now, we of course do not, engage with numbers as quantitative studies would do, but it would be wrong to say that we don't look at numbers at all. In fact, when you're doing participant observations, numbers can be very, very helpful in the initial stages, right? Why? Because they help you understand certain critical trends, certain critical patterns. Again, to give you an example, if in a panchayat meeting related to certain development programs, I am able to count the number of people who are attending the panchayat meeting, right? And also over subsequent meetings, if I can see whether the number of people who are attending the meetings are increasing or decreasing, it will give me some insight which I can then subsequently probe in terms of the reception of this particular development program, right? Whether it was well received, whether people were not interested. And that is something that I can begin with and then continue to do my research. And that can be used as a starting point to start talking to people as to why they did not attend or why did they attend these meetings, right? The fourth part of observation is called attending to conversations. Now, attending to conversations is that, when you're doing mapping the scene or when you're doing community mapping, it's important to also observe the conversations that people have with us, of course, as researchers, but also conversations that people have amongst themselves, right? What are people talking about? We should also focus on the activities that people are doing, right? So in a space, just position of people is not enough. You should also map what is it that people are doing, what are the different activities that people are engaging in, right? So for instance, in a classroom, it's not enough for me to say how this classroom is and how are people arranged in this classroom, but I would also want to understand what are people doing in this classroom. So in a physical setup, for instance, the teacher is teaching. There'll be certain students who are writing notes. There's certain who are probably sleeping, right? There's certain others who are doing some other assignments. Different activities. There'll be people who will be talking to each other. What are the conversations that are unfolding? These are all aspects which should be captured, right? Now, along with verbal conversations, we should also observe and record non-verbal cues. Now, non-verbal cues is, for example, I'm doing a study on women and women's issues within their domestic sphere, right? And I'm talking to a woman, and it so happens that during that conversation, say suppose a family member walks in, say suppose the husband walks in or the mother-in-law walks in, somebody walks in, which immediately changes the body language of this woman. Now that is a non-verbal cue for me. That is something that I should not just brush off. That's something that should be recorded. That's something that I should take into account, right? Similarly, say suppose you're doing an interview and somebody starts crying. Somebody just goes numb. Somebody goes silent. Please don't think that these are peripheral things or these are breaks in your data collection process. They are your data. All of these non-verbal, communication, non-verbal cues are a part of your data. They should never be ignored, right? Now, along with these couple of course, this is not an exhaustive list of how you can do observation, but some of the most useful methods that I have personally used, and I thought I should share with you. Now, along with these, when you're doing observation, what all should you observe, right? Now, I said yesterday, just because you're looking at something doesn't mean you're observing, right? And therefore, we need to have in mind certain elements that we should focus on when you're looking at a particular scene, And those elements are: one, focus on the space. Second, also focus on the different objects. So say suppose in a classroom, the objects would be the tables, the chair, the blackboard, etc. Right? Focus on the actors. Who are the people in this scene? Focus on the activities. What are people doing? Right? Uh, and this again includes the non-verbal cues. Then focus on events. There's a possibility that there is a special event that has happened in that particular time. Focus on the chronology, the time, right? So classroom activities, for instance, can change over time. So chronologically, how does your scene change from morning to evening, right? Or from beginning of the session to the end of the session, how does it change? Then also focus on goals. What are people trying to achieve? And lastly, focus on feelings. Focus on emotions at display, right? Happy, sad, anger, whatever. Any form of emotion that is being displayed should also be looked at. Now, these are elements that you should always keep in mind. If you keep in mind these elements, it really makes your observation very systematic, very structured. You will not miss on details, right? But coming to certain biases, in qualitative research, we talk about 3 biases. I will first would want to show you, in fact, a video, right? Biases. Let me just start this. Okay. Can you see this? Is this visible?
No.
No. Is it visible now?
No, I mean, we can see the screen, but
Visual sound?
Okay, let me just play.
The monkey business illusion.
Can you? Is this audible now?
Oh, yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, let me play it again. All right, just look at this video.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Did you count how many times? Anybody has an answer?
12.
16, 15, 14. Okay, 15, 16, 14. All right, let me just finish playing this.
The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla. If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game? Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion.
Right. How many of you have seen a video like this? There's several of these that are there, but how many are aware of this monkey business illusion? Oh, okay, all right. Okay, see, so that's the first bias in observation. Okay, just let me share my presentation again. Okay, this is visible, right? Okay, now
Yes.
see, so the first All right, thank you. So the first bias in observation is called the inattentional bias. Now, what happens is, when we have our questions fixed in research, we are so concentrated on finding answers, but there's so many things that are happening in the background that we tend to miss, right? So much important information that could be relevant for us, but we tend to miss it. That's the bias of attention, right? We are so fixated, our attention is so drawn on certain aspects about research. There's so many other things that we forget to observe, right? Now that's called inattentional bias. The second type of bias that you'd usually see in research is, you can call it like a cultural bias. And I'll give you an example. My favorite example to give, I've been at the receiving end of it several times, that's why probably. Now, when for those of you who drive, and even if those people who do not drive, right? Uh, Slide is not visible. It is visible, right? Okay, all right. So yeah, in terms of this cultural bias, for those of you who drive, especially women who drive, would know. Very often, if you're driving and the person in front of you, if they're probably not driving properly, what is the first comment that comes? Usually, you would have seen it very often.
Women.
That the driver is a female, right? ये लड़की चला रही है, आता नहीं है, right? Now that's a cultural bias, right? And that comes from this idea because somehow in our society we do, I mean, not for everybody, but generally there is this understanding of what works, what aspects of life women can partake in and what can they not, right? What women are good at and what men do better, right? So that is another form of bias. That's a cultural bias. Now, there is no statistical study that will prove women are bad drivers, right? It's a cultural bias. It comes from my culture, correct? Unfortunately, when you have a combination of cultural bias like this and inattentional bias, you lead to what is called as confirmatory bias. In our research, we tend to write down conclusions that will confirm things like this, right? And that becomes a confirmatory bias. So we have to be very cautious of our prejudices, very cautious of not missing on details in observation exercises, right? You're with me till here? Yeah? Okay, now very quickly moving to the last part of participant observation. This is about observational focus. Okay, now in order to overcome some of these biases and also in order to ensure that your research is robust, try and keep these stages of observation in mind. Now the first stage is called the descriptive observation, and that's basically a bird's eye view, right? So you're looking at an area or a group of people from a far off distance, right? So you adopt a wide focus and you describe the generic details of a place. It's a general description of a place or a group of people, whatever that your study area is. Descriptive observations are not related to your research questions. They're not focused, right? They're just generic. So I go to an area, I'm just generally observing and I'm writing down everything that I see. It may be of use to my research, it may not be of relevance to my research, but nevertheless, I do document. Now, once I've done descriptive observation, I move to what's called as focused observation. Now, this is when you get down from your aeroplane view and say suppose take a cycle and start moving around in an area. So what that does is it slows your pace, right? Now, in focused observation, here you start focusing on your research questions. And while you're observing with specific reference to your research questions, naturally you will get certain insights, certain results, certain patterns will emerge, certain categories, certain taxonomies will emerge. Basically, certain insights from your field will start coming out, right? Now, once this stage is over, you move to what is called a selective observation, and this is the final stage of observation where you slow down even more, right? So your pace has to be slowed down even more. So instead of cycling in that area now, you should start walking, right? Now, what you do in selective observation is that those insights, those certain trends, certain patterns that emerged in your focused observation should be confirmed in this stage of observation, right? So this is also called as triangulating your data, right? You understand what triangulation of data is? Right. So basically, if there are certain insights that have come up, I would want to confirm if these are correct by falling back on other sources. So if, say, suppose through observation certain things have come, I would want to see if those insights are correct by, say, suppose interviewing people. I might want to fall back on certain records that exist, right, in order to ensure whether what I've found is correct or not. Now, in selective observation, along with confirming or triangulating your data, please also be mindful of seeing if there are any contradictory evidences, if there are any outliers to this pattern, if there are any unique cases other than what the general trend is, right? Those aspects should also be documented. Now, if you follow these ways and means that we've just discussed of observation, as I said, it becomes robust and it also helps you keep yourself on track, right? Now, to sum up participant observation, this is one of the most useful methods in qualitative research. And participant observation basically as a method is something that can be used as standalone. You can do your entire research purely based on participant observation if you want. But very often you will see in research that it's used along with certain other methods, right? So multiple methods, an eclectic mix is what is used. And that leads us to our second method, which is the interview method. Now, what are interviews? If some of you could quickly share your thoughts. What do you think are interviews? Very simply. Okay.
Asking questions.
Okay.
Have
The
something
options.
to face with the participants regarding any problem or concern.
Okay. Yes. Yes. It's a conversation. You're talking to your participants regarding whatever particular phenomena or issue that you're studying. Yes. Now, if you look at the definition of interviews, it's simply, a research interview, specifically a research interview, is an interview where knowledge is constructed in the interaction between the interviewer and the interviewee, right? Now, to put it simply, interviews are basically an interchange of views or an exchange of views between two or more people, right? And as one of you rightly said, about some common topic of discussion, right? Now, having said that, is it really as simple as, the interviewer asking questions, the respondent answering, and then again question, and again answer, again question, again answer? Is it as simple as that? Well, the answer is no, because there are several layers to this simple Q&A, right? Now, on the left of the presentation, you can see the first thing that happens in an interview is, as an interviewer, I have to code a question, encode a question, right? Now, when I'm encoding a question, there are a couple of things that I have to keep in mind. One is the purpose of my asking this question. What is it that I intend to do by asking question is, who am I talking to, right? So if, say, suppose I'm doing a study about relevance of pedagogy, then I cannot frame the same question for an adult, say suppose a teacher or a parent, as for a child. The question has to be framed differently. It has to be encoded very differently. Similarly, in very sensitive issues or very sensitive researches, we have to again be mindful of how we encode questions. So, for instance, if in a riot somebody loses a family member, and I'm going to go and interview somebody who survived and seen this or lost a family member, then I cannot be blunt enough to go and ask, oh, did they kill your family member in that riot? I cannot do it. Right? That's very, very insensitive way of asking something. Right? So how you encode a question is important. It's equally tricky, because that's where a lot of us fail. Right? Now, the second part to this process is decoding the question. Now, please remember, the person in front of you, once you've asked a question, the person in front of you has to decode this question. And our respondents are way, way smarter than us, no matter where you go. Any setup, rural, urban, corporate, government, whatever it is, your respondent is 2 steps ahead. Always go with that thinking, right? Now, when they're decoding this question, they of course have to decode what is it that you have asked, right? They have to understand the question, but remember, they also decode you. As an interviewer, they will also decode you. That basically means in their mind, there will be these questions of, who is this person who's asking me this question? Why is this person here? Why is this person asking me this question? Right? So all of these elements together will function when the respondent is decoding the question. The next stage is, of course, the respondent has to encode an answer. Now, when people encode answers to certain questions, they will only talk about those aspects, or they will only highlight those aspects which they think are important for me to know about them. Right? And to give you a very quick example, if in this group, if I ask you, can you tell me something about yourself? Everybody, there are 100 participants, there'll be 100 different answers. Somebody might want to focus on their qualifications. Somebody might want to focus on where they come from. Somebody might, highlight more about their hobbies or their skills, right? Somebody can talk about their nature. So everybody highlights something different. And that's based on what they want to showcase, right? Or what they think is important for me to know about them, right? Now, also, please remember that not everybody in this world knows how to be interviewed. So very often in your interview, you will, when you're doing your research, you might come across people who may not be able to answer properly, right? It's not as if they're not interested or if they don't want to help. It's just that not everybody is well versed with, how do you participate in interviews. Now, the last stage is, of course, that as a researcher, now I have to decode whatever answer has come. The point I'm trying to make is very simple, that there are several layers of interpretation and meaning that are going on. It's not a simple Q&A, right? Now, if you look at interview as a method, it has a very long history. And I think the earliest interview happened, I think, somewhere in the middle 1800s. It was a journalistic interview. And since then, of course, as a method, it has evolved and has a wide range of applications. Journalism, anthropology, sociology, several other disciplines, medical research, psychology, market research is entirely based on interviews. So all those customer feedback interview calls that you get, that's basically a form of interview. And interview today, has become all pervasive. And that's what we call as interview society. Now, what do I mean by that? That interview is today, you see interviews everywhere. It has become a tool for us to represent the self, show about ourselves. And a classic example of this is those talk shows, right? All those talk shows that come, they are an example of what an interview society looks like. So say suppose if celebrities are coming on talk shows and telling about themselves, that's basically a way of showcasing the self, telling about yourself, presenting yourself to the world, right? Now, and I said interviews have become all pervasive. So as I said, all your customer feedback calls that you get, post-match ceremonies, every cricket match or any other sport, you have these post-match ceremonies where there's this interview going on with the players. That is again a form of interview. Similarly, interrogations, there are interviews. For job interviews, for admission into institutions, for all of these, there are interviews that are used, right? Now, my question to you is interview or a research interview same as everyday conversation? No. Okay. But why? What's different? If it's not the same as everyday conversation, what's different? Right? Absolutely. Now, the first and most fundamental difference is that unlike everyday conversations, interviews have a very clear purpose. They have a very clear objective, right, as to why they're happening. An intention, correct, right? Any other difference? Right? Everyday conversation is informal. There is a context to interviews, yes. Now, the other difference that exists in terms of interviews and everyday conversation is that interviews are also very structured. Even when you're doing informal interviews, there is still some structure which you will not see in everyday conversations. There is a very set turn taking that happens, which doesn't happen when you're having informal conversations with people. When you're having everyday conversations, that's not the case. In interviews, that level of formality is maintained. And also, unlike everyday conversations, the interviewer usually speaks less, at least in qualitative research. The turn taking isn't equal. So interviewee or your researchers, research participants are the ones that will do more talking. Yes, power dynamics is also an element, right? That's part of research. So all of these are aspects that make it different from everyday conversations. Now, moving on to type of interviews, I've broadly listed here three types of interviews. One is your structured interviews. Now, structured interviews are more like questionnaires, right? The survey questionnaires. Now, they're structured because they have very set questions, right? And all of these questions have to be answered in a chronological manner. So 1 to 10, you have to go in a chronological order. Semi-structured interviews, here now, instead of having specific set questions, instead what we have is broad questions, right? Or say, suppose themes about which we would want to discuss with our respondents. Now, again, unlike structured interviews, in semi-structured interviews, you need not follow a chronological order, right? So it doesn't happen that 1, 2, 3, 4, that's not the case in semi-structured interviews. How you ask your questions, in what order you ask your questions, really depends on the conversation that is unfolding, really depends on what your respondents are saying, right? For example, it so happens that in my first question itself, my respondent has answered my fifth question as well, right? I need not repeat that question, right? Now, a way of understanding semi-structured interviews is also to think of semi-structured interviews like grocery shopping. Okay, so where you have a list of items that you have to pick up, but when you finally reach the shop, you don't go in a chronological order. You just pick up whatever is there, whatever you see first, and you strike it off your list, right? You don't go one by one. That's the case for semi-structured interviews as well. Now, when you do unstructured interviews, they're the closest to informal conversations. And here you do not have questions per se. What you do instead is, one, you speak very little. As an interviewer, you speak very little. You begin with a long introduction about yourself, about your research, what is it that you're expecting from this interview. And then finally, after this long introduction and details, you hand it over to your respondents to then lead the direction, right? And in unstructured interviews, it can go in any direction. It is entirely dependent on your respondents, what they want to talk about, right? Of course, within the broad frame of your research, right? Now, if you look at these different kinds of interviews, of course, I'm sure you understand by now that your structured interviews are more rigid compared to the others, and they are interviewer centered, right? Whereas your unstructured interviews are flexible, and they're also interviewee centered. They're centered around your respondent. So the element of power dynamics or control varies across these different forms of interviews. Now, in qualitative research, we largely don't use structured interviews, right? We will follow only semi-structured or unstructured interviews. Now, how do you decide which type of interview you would use, right? And it depends from context to context. So for instance, if I'm doing an exploratory study, I want to understand about a particular issue in depth, but I don't know anything about it. What kind of method would you recommend? What do you think will be the most useful when I don't know anything? Unstructured, correct, right? Similarly, if say suppose I'm part of a research where there are several interviewers, right? There are multiple interviewers doing a qualitative study about a particular issue in a particular area. In such a scenario, when there are multiple people who are taking interviews, right? Multiple team members who are taking interviews, which is an ideal type? Okay, semi-structured, yes. Structured also, but yes, if you want more open-ended answers, then you can work with semi-structured interviews as well. Now, in a scenario when, say, suppose I am, looking to do a comparative study, when I'm wanting to compare two cases, say, suppose two different groups of people, in that case, what kind of method would be useful? A structured interview works better, because if I have to draw a comparison, then in that case, we need to have certain standards put in place, certain specific questions that everybody should answer. Now, moving ahead, just like how we did for participant observation, why interviews, right? Where is it that interview as a method becomes useful? Now, if you compare it with survey method, the first thing where interview stands at an advantage is that these are flexible. And by interviews now, what I mean is, qualitative in-depth interviews. So they're flexible because unlike surveys, here the questions are not structured, they're not rigid, right? And also the answers are not pre-coded, unlike in a survey, right, where you have that A, B, C, D, E option. Now, the second is that interviews then allow us to capture non-verbal communication, which surveys cannot, right? Surveys don't have the space to accommodate for all of this, but in interviews, you have the scope to capture body language, silences, emotional breakdowns, etc. Similarly, what interviews allow you to also to do is to go beyond surface level, to engage with people at a deeper level, because you're having conversations with people. You're not asking for, one word, two word answers. You're having a deep conversation with people. So it allows you to engage at a deeper level with people. Now, interviews are also, compared to surveys, useful when you have little knowledge about your field. In fact, very often you would see when people are designing surveys for an area which is new, right? They would tend to do a pilot study with interviews with a couple of people in order to understand how they can design a survey better, right? Naturally, it provides you a respondent's view, where you allow your respondents to share their perspective in a manner that they want to, right? Unlike survey, where your researcher is in control, here respondents have the free flow in terms of how they want to discuss, what they want to discuss, what they don't want to discuss as well, right? And of course, it is also comparatively less hierarchical. So usually in surveys, because it's so structured, the research is always at a higher pedestal. It's always at a higher ground, As I said, they're in control. But if you are a researcher who wishes to do research that respects equality, right, that respects equality of your participants as well. Say, suppose if you're somebody who's doing feminist research. Now, in that case, interviews are a better option than survey, because it gives some level of equality to even your respondents. They are free to ask questions to you. You could actually use unstructured interviews. There is a term called as active interviews, where you allow your respondents also to question you. Right, so it's less hierarchical. Now, if you compare it with participant observation, where does interview stand? Now, compared to participant observation, interviews help you capture those issues which are resistant to observation. So, to give an example, for instance, if I want to do a study on veganism or vegetarianism, right? Now, that's an issue that's not readily observable, right? In fact, I can't observe much on this issue. Even if I do observe, then there are only very specific times when I can observe. That's probably at a time when people eat, so maybe 3 times a day, right, or maybe 4 times a day, or 2 times a day. It's very restrictive in that sense. On the other hand, I could always interview a person, who's a vegan or vegetarian, and interact and learn more about them. It gives me more information. Similarly, there are certain spaces which are resistant to observation, such as if I want to do prison studies, if I want to understand what happens inside prisons. One, access is difficult, right? Even if you get access, observation is not probably the best ways for ethical reasons, etc. You might want to go for interviews. Now, the second point where interviews are better than participant observation is that allows for reconstruction of events. Now, what happens in participant observation is that we are observing. Now, when we observe as researchers, we have our lenses to observe. We have our points of view. And therefore, we interpret what we are seeing from our lenses, right? And we draw conclusions from those same lenses. Now, how people feel about our conclusions and our insights, it's possible that it may or may not align, right? Now, in that scenario, interviews are far better, because what interviews does is that it allows people to decide what information they want to share, which events of their life they want to share, in which chronology they want to share it, which aspects they want to highlight, which aspects they want to de-highlight, which aspects they completely want to ignore, right? So it's their lens being used for interpretation, right? And therefore we say that interviews allow people to reconstruct events, reconstruct what has happened in the past, for instance, as they want to, as per their will, right? Third, in cases of ethical considerations, again, interviews might be more useful. So for instance, if there's somebody who wants to study the gang culture, say like James Patrick, right? Now James Patrick did a participant observation, but maybe you decide, because of ethical considerations, say suppose if there are criminal activities involved, right? For ethical considerations, you will, not to jeopardize the safety of your respondents, you may decide that you don't want to go ahead with observation, right? And therefore you might want to study drug cartels, or want to study black market through interviews. That's a safer, maybe more ethical way of doing it. Similarly, say somebody you want, in medical research is interested in understanding the experience of people who, having terminal illness, decide to end their lives. Again, being a very sensitive issue, you may not want to observe it, right? The best way is you have a conversation with people, right? And naturally, therefore, interviews are less intrusive. So you're not constantly poking your nose into somebody's business, right? You're not constantly looking at people, just being around them. Now, what it also does, it allows you greater coverage, right? Which basically means you can do more number of cases at different time periods. Now, observation happens whenever an event is unfolding. You have to be there, right? Interviews, even if an event has already happened, you can always go back and have a conversation at any point in time, right? So it allows for more number of people to be covered, and it's more convenient. Now, again, unlike a participant observation where you observe everything, right, when you see everything, interviews can be more focused. You can focus your questions only related to your research. They can be far more specific in focus. Now, moving on to who is a good interviewer. I hope you're with me till here. Okay, great, thank you. Now, moving on to who is a good interviewer, and I think I've mentioned this several times. Qualitative research, yes, we teach it. There are methods, but much of qualitative research is really about you as a person, as a researcher, right? And therefore, the qualities that a researcher carries with them becomes very, very important. Now, for a good interview, as an interviewer, I should be knowledgeable. And what I mean by knowledgeable is that I should have some prior knowledge about the topic or the people or the culture or the community that I'm going to be interacting with. Now, I should also have the capability to structure. Now, remember, when you are doing an interview, there is always a structure that folds. And by structure, I don't mean rigidity, I mean the flow of how an interview is taken. We always begin with easy or introductory questions, which are more descriptive, right? And only then, over a period of time, move into more complex questions where we are trying to seek people's personal opinions, their perspective, their intimate experiences, for instance, right? So you move from what questions to why questions. So that is the structure that I'm talking about. Then, as an interviewer, you also should be clear. Now, clear basically means that please don't use academic jargons when we speak to people. Don't use concepts that we've learned in our classrooms, right? Should be very clear. Your question should be very simple. You should also be very gentle, which basically means that when you're speaking to people, please give them time. Don't be in a hurry. Give them time to reflect. If people break down, if somebody cries in your interview, please be patient. Don't get hassled. Right? All of this happens when you're seeking, personal experiences. A lot of emotions come to the fore, right? And let that happen. You also need to be sensitive, which basically means, as I said in the beginning, you should know how to ask questions, right? And when people do give you a response, please don't judge them. And in asking questions, also be mindful that you don't offend people, right? So don't ask questions that can be insulting, for instance. You also need to be open. Now, what happens in qualitative research, because there is not so much of structure, there is not so much of control that the researcher has, an interview can really throw anything at you. The process can throw anything at you, right? So please be open-minded in terms of accepting views that you do not agree with, right? That you've not known about, that may not align with your cultural values. You have to be open-minded about it, right? Also be prepared. There is possibility that your respondents can get angry. They might want to suddenly get up and walk out of the interview. Please be open-minded about that as well. Then you should know how to steer your interview, which basically means that if you feel that your interviewee, your respondent is getting detracked, right? It's really going in some haywire direction. Learn to very politely bring them back, right? Bring them back within the realm of your research. You also need to be critical, which basically means just because I said you have to be open-minded and you have to accept whatever people say, doesn't mean that you cannot question them if you see contradictions. So if people have said something in the beginning and then they've changed their stance, you can politely ask them that there is this contradiction that you see. Are you correct, right, in observing that? Is that what they really wanted to say, or have you interpreted it wrongly, right? Now that's being critical. You also need to remember, now this is that same aspect of grocery shopping. So if somebody's already answered your question, just because it's written in your interview schedule doesn't mean you have to again ask it, right? Interpreting. Now interpreting is that in interviews, you should continuously keep summarizing, interpreting what people have said in order to ensure that you are on the correct path of understanding, right? So this is another aspect. You also need to be balanced. Now balance is don't talk too much and don't talk too less. We need to have that right balance. And of course, ethically sensitive. As I said, Know what impact your research has. If it's triggering trauma, and if you feel that this research has to stop, that it's going out of line, have it in you to stop that research. You don't have to go ahead and complete the research just because you know, it's part of your curriculum or whatever. You have to find another way of doing it now, but that's a stand that of course you have to take. Now there are several stages to the interview process, and the first stage is preparing for an interview. Now, in this phase, what you do is, of course, you prepare by identifying who your respondents are going to be. You seek their permission, you seek their availability, you fix a date and venue. But more importantly, what you do is that you prepare an interview schedule. Now, when you prepare an interview schedule, what the general research process is that you have a research area, a general research area with which you begin. Then you narrow it down to your research questions. Things that is basically research questions is what you present in your proposals. Then you move to interview topics, and from interview topics you formulate interview questions. You might want to revise this interview questionnaire that you have. Probably also conduct a pilot study to identify issues in your tool. Revise it and finalize this schedule, finalize this interview tool. Now, the challenge in interview is, the challenge that interview throws at us as a method is to move from research questions to interview questions. Now, remember, research questions are very abstract, they're overarching, they're broad, and they're academic, right? So the tone of research questions is academic. But interview questions are not so, right? And interview questions is basically that the research questions that you have in your proposals, right, need to be broken down into simpler questions, into questions that people can easily understand and respond to, right? I'll give you an example of this. This is from a study by Wall, and this is on school and the grading systems, right? So if one of the questions here is the second question, if you can look at, do the grades promote an external instrumental motivation at the expense of an intrinsic interest or motivation for learning? Now, if that is a broad research question that I have as a researcher, I cannot directly go and ask my respondents the same question. I have to break it down into smaller, easier questions that people can digest and respond, right? So this person here has broken it down into several questions. So in order to understand the impact that grades have, whether it's instrumental motivation or there is an intrinsic interest for learning, this person is actually asked the interview questions such as, what is your main purpose in going to school? Or have you experienced a conflict between what you wanted to read and what you had to read to obtain a good grade? Or have you been rewarded with money for good grades, right? So that's one of the ways in which you can actually go about from research questions to interview questions. But this is an exercise that mandatorily has to be taken. You can never take your research questions directly to your respondents, right? Now, the second phase, once your respondents are decided, say, and your interview schedule is ready, the second phase is the actual doing of the interview, right? It's the dynamic part of the interview. Now, I've mentioned that there is a structure that exists, and by structure, again, I repeat, it's not the rigidity, but it's the flow, right? So there is a flow in which the interviews have to be taken, right? And as I said, in an actual taking of an interview, you always begin with introductory questions, or you begin with a briefing. Now, in this part of your interview, what you usually be doing is you introduce yourself. Who are you, right? Where are you from? Maybe an institution, an organization that you're affiliated with. What is your research about? What will you do with this data that you're collecting? It's at this stage itself that you also have to seek permission to go ahead. Only if people give you permission should you go ahead and conduct the interview. And if possible, you should also seek permission to record an interview, because both for participant observation and interviews, if it's possible to record in some audiovisual format, it's good, because what happens here is because you're having a conversation, and if you start writing down notes, that may become, difficult because it breaks the rhythm of the person who's responding to you. So you're not really able to strike conversation at that level. But if it's, of course, if permission is not given, then that's absolutely fine. Then you can jot down a couple of things, maybe key points that have been talked about, or just remember, right? Anyway, it's at the introductory phase that you have to seek permission for recording. And you also, at this stage, should ask if the respondents have any questions for you, right? And also, please inform that your respondent is free to leave the interview at any stage. If they're not comfortable, if they don't want to carry on, they are free to leave the interview. Now, the second part of doing that interview is the actual interview, and that's where your skills, all those aspects that we talk about a good, interviewer, all of that comes into play. Now, here also remember that part of structuring where you begin with easy questions and then you go to slightly more difficult questions and finally to more personal, intimate questions, right? The last stage, the next stage is called rounding off or debriefing. Now here, as a interviewer, I would want to summarize what I've understood in order to ensure that I've understood things correctly. I, of course, thank people for their time, for making the effort of sharing their experiences. And I, again, assure them of, maintaining confidentiality. So I should not reveal names of my participants. And if they have any other questions, that also, this is the time for them to ask questions. Of course, they can ask it at any other point as well, but formally we have to do it. Now, after you've finished this stage, there is also something called as after the end, right? So once your formal interview is over, your recorders are off, usually people don't just get up and walk away. Your conversation continues into a more informal conversation. And it's quite possible that it is at that point of time when the recorder is off, right, that people let their guards down, which basically means that they continue to talk to you, and it's probably now, knowing that you're not recording, that they will give you more sensitive information. And I can share an example here from my own work. I was working on the issue of resettlement of communities from one of the protected areas in India. And I was speaking to one of the forest department officials. And it so happened, I was of course curious to understand that why this particular case, among so many cases of failure of resettlement in India, how suddenly there's this one case which is being lauded as very successful, right? So I was speaking to this forest official, and he told me a number of reasons that, okay, this was successful because of A, B, C, D, etc., 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 until the end of the interview, when I finally switched off the recorder. And as I said, the conversation continued after that, and it's at that point of time that he, really started speaking to me in terms of giving more, inner details. And he said that, yes, all of these things have happened, but, the forest department and some of the people in the forest department have actually gone out of their way. They've twisted the law such that they're able to help some of the community members. Now, this is, as a government employee, this is information that he cannot give me on record, right? Now, what do you think should you do in such a situation? As a researcher, what should I do?
It's tricky, but maybe ask if we can use that information as part of the interview.
Correct. See, yes. Now, the first aspect for those who are new to research, of course, is that please don't start recording again, right? Don't even start writing notes. Just have a conversation. If somebody is speaking to you informally, please just speak. Please don't start writing notes, right? Don't switch on your recorders as well. But as has been said right now, this is a tricky situation because this is something that has not been shared on record. So how do you use this information? You can, of course, seek consent if people are willing to share this information. And there is a possibility that they may agree, but there is also a possibility that they may not agree, right? Somebody has a question?
No,
Yes.
so I was just thinking that, yeah, I mean, so if they say they can't, I mean, we can't use it, we could still use that information to see if there will be another source who can give us that information on record, right? So it's still useful.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a wonderful point. So, there's possibility that I might not directly quote what this person has said, but it can actually be used as a lead to investigate further, right? Person gives consent to use it, great. Even if they don't, as has been said, my research doesn't stop here. And even in cases where I feel that, okay, despite all my efforts, despite trying other sources, if it's so possible that I cannot use this information, then I have to let it go. As a researcher, I have to be morally upright and let it go, right? It's not as if I have to report everything that has happened in the field, especially when people don't consent to this information going out, right? So that's absolutely fine. Your research is never perfect. Nobody seeks or strives for perfection in these cases, that you should have all the information. So that's absolutely okay if you don't use this information. But as a very good point has been made, you can always follow up, right? Now, um, as part of interview, there are certain do's and don'ts also that we should keep in mind. Now, do's, of course, most of these we have talked about, but just to reiterate once again, first thing as a do, as a must for interview, is that you should listen attentively, right? Now, you should also ask about sensitive issues very skillfully. That's a skill that we have to develop in terms of how do you communicate to people. Again, adjusting questions to situation. So depending on who you're talking to, depending on if the question has already been answered, please adjust your interview schedule. Again, ask for clarifications, not just at the end of your interview. Don't just summarize and seek clarifications at the end, but feel free to interject in between as well, to seek clarification, to know if what you understood is correct or not. Then naturally ask open-ended questions, and I'll give you an example for that. But the most important 2 points of the do's part of interviews are the last 2 points written here. Now, how do you know whether your interview is progressing in the right direction, or whether your interview actually is good, right? These 2 points help you in qualitative research if you're doing an in-depth interview. The first way of knowing if your interview is good, right, is that you should allow people, or people basically should respond in a manner where they speak like they're telling you a story. It's a narration. It's a narrative. It's a story that's being narrated. It's not just some factual information that's being given to you, but it's literally weaving a story. So when people do that, that's your first sign that your interview is good. The second sign that your interview is good is when you are able to elicit a personal voice, which basically means that when people are narrating these stories, if people are telling you their personal stories, right? So if they're answering your questions through their personal experiences, through their personal stories, that's what we are trying to achieve. That's what tells you that your interview is good. That's what is an indicator that you really build your rapport with this person, and your interview is going in a good direction, right? Now, with the do's, there are also certain don'ts. And don'ts are like, please avoid asking little known facts. So for instance, if I go to a village and I ask, some member there that how many male members have migrated from this village. And that's an information that the exact number this person may not be able to tell, right? I can always fall back on records for such information, right? Or say, suppose if I ask, what population, what percentage of the population is male and what percentage is female. Again, there are records that I can fall back on. This is something that I know will not be accurately available, right? Now, the second don't is please avoid yes, no questions. Now, yes, no questions is, so if I want to get some concrete feedback from all of you on this workshop, one is that I ask you, so, what did you, or did you like this workshop? Now, a question like, did you like this workshop? The immediate answer is yes or no, right? Or the very short answers. On the other hand, in order to get concrete feedback, I could probably ask you, what are some of your key takeaways? Or I could ask you, what was your experience like in this workshop? So that's a better way of asking or putting forward questions. The third don't is that you should avoid multiple choice questions. Now, multiple choice questions is like survey questions, right? Where I'm already giving these choices to people to answer from. So say suppose if somebody is migrated to Australia, Canada, wherever, right? And I ask this person that, having migrated from India to Australia and having lived in Australia for say 10, 20 years, do you see yourself as a Indian or Australian? Right? So I'm asking people these, I'm giving them these choices from which they have to pick. Even if I want to know how people identify themselves, I can actually completely avoid such a multiple choice questions. Interestingly, when you speak to people and when you are attentive to them sharing their life stories, these issues will automatically be addressed. You don't even have to ask a direct question for this, right? Similarly, avoid multiple questions at the same time. Now, multiple questions at the same time is, so if say suppose I ask you, do you feel satisfied with the salary and the work environment that your job offers, right? And somebody responds and says, yes, it's fine. Now, as an interviewer, it's problematic for me because the answer is ambiguous. I don't know if you've said fine for your salary, or you've said fine for the work environment, or you've said fine for both. The best way is break it down. There are two things that you're trying to ask. Please ask in two separate questions, right? Again, don't switch topics too frequently. As I said, you have to elicit a personal response. It has to be a story that, of course, has to be descriptive. It is going to be long. So if you keep interjecting and switching topics too frequently, it breaks the rhythm. It breaks the flow of people speaking to you. Now, also avoid imposing concepts. Now, to give an example, also from the last session's question, say suppose if there is a woman domestic worker who is or has a abusive husband, right? Who doesn't contribute anything, and basically this woman continues or decides to continue to live with the husband, right? Now, us as researchers should not, one, of course, impose our judgment, and then imposing our judgment, we should not ask them questions that impose concepts that we have learned, right? So for instance, you shouldn't ask things like, are you not able to leave your husband because we live in a patriarchal society, right? Why? Because people don't necessarily see their lives through these concepts. People don't live their lives through these concepts. They're just living, right? It's quite possible that this woman who's taken a decision has done so very calculatively. It could be probably a very rational decision that she has taken from her point of view, right? So please don't mistake me that I'm not justifying patriarchy or suppression. All I'm trying to point out is that it's possible that people don't see their lives operating through certain concepts that we learn, right? Or it's possible that they don't see themselves and they don't want to be seen by others as victims, right? That's something that we should respect. Now, another example of this that comes to mind of concepts is, when a lot of people ask me, which place do you belong to, right? And this idea of belonging has some fixity. And whenever this question is thrown at me, I just, get puzzled because I don't know what to say. And I answer different things to different people. So reason being, because, for me, I ancestrally belong to Himachal, but, I'm a Punjabi. I've lived my entire life in Dehradun, but I work in Bombay. I've studied in Delhi. So for me, I don't know where I belong. I belong nowhere and I belong everywhere. right? So this concept of belonging to a place, fixating it, right? And then trying to identify me or relating me to a particular place. That is something that we should avoid. Now, we should also avoid leading questions, and this unfortunately happens very often, happens with me as well. An example of this is by the end of this workshop, I'll ask you, so you like this workshop, didn't you? Now, that's basically putting words in your mouth. So you have to say, yes, we liked it, right? So instead of leaving it open-ended, I am leading you to an answer. I've already told you that, yes, you have to say yes to such an answer. Most people would say yes unless you're very blunt and you say no, you're useless, right? So those are certain don'ts that also should be kept in mind. And now to the last part, which is post interviews. Now, after your interview is over, there are a couple of things that again you should keep in mind. One is immediately after an interview, as soon as possible, you should make a reflexive note. Like in participant observation, I said you have to maintain your diaries. Even for an interview, it is a good practice to have a reflexive note where you write down what unfolded during an interview. How did you interpret what was happening? Your own reactions, etc. All of these can be noted down. The second aspect after your interview is to transcribe. Transcriptions are key in qualitative research, right? Now, when you transcribe, what all should you keep in mind? One, the transcription has to be verbatim. Now, verbatim means word to word. Now, throughout our education systems, we've been trained to summarize. We've been trained to write in concise, write in short, right? In transcription, please don't translate or summarize such that you miss details, right? Be mindful of the habit that we've developed over so many years of education, right? When you are transcribing, please also transcribe or please also note in your transcriptions movements of silence or movements of breakdown or movements when body language of a person changes. Now, there are ways. You usually don't write it down like that. You could usually put them into brackets. At that exact moment when it happened, you can put it within brackets that there was a visible change in the body language of so and so person, or when I asked this question, this person just broke down or went silent for 5 minutes, right? Now, those aspects should also be written down in your transcripts, more specifically because, when you are doing your analysis yourself, you would remember probably. But when you have a team that's working, their analysis is being done by somebody else, they wouldn't know all of this happened unless you've written it down, right? And another aspect of transcription is please don't hesitate in using native terms. Please don't hesitate in using native language. The reason I say this is, see, language is not just a medium of communication, right? Language is also key to a culture, right? It represents a culture. It's a reflection of a culture. And that's why you will have so many native words, say in Hindi or any other language, right? Which may not have a direct translation into English, right? Or even if you do translate it into English, it might lose the meaning that it carries, right? Therefore, you should transcribe or you should translate into English, but please make sure that for these very peculiar words or peculiar sentences that have been used, do also mention in your transcript the native language that has been used. And then finally, of course, after your interviews are over and your transcripts are ready, you move into analysis, right? And analysis in qualitative research is of different kinds. So you can have, discourse analysis, a discursive analysis. You can have linguistic analysis. You can have, mix of different kinds of analysis. But the most basic, which of course Professor Gupta would also be taking, is on coding, right? Which comes from grounded theory by Glaser and Strauss. So that's that idea of manual coding, of selective coding, and then actual coding, all of those elements of manual coding, I think he will be taking. But I will stop here and open it up for discussions, questions, comments. Yes. Yes, Shambhavi.
Hi, thank you so much for that. It was wonderful. I
Thank
have
you.
a question about language
Mhm.
in the sense that I'm currently in the process of conducting a qualitative research myself, for which I am interviewing participants, and a
Mhm.
lot of my participants are responding in Hindi.
Mhm.
Now, as a researcher, I understand and I'm fluent in both English and Hindi, but
Mhm.
obviously the coding that will happen subsequently and also the report that I will be generating of my research will be in English. So how
Mhm.
does one then do the translation of the responses that have emerged in Hindi? Is that like the onus of that is on the researcher, I understand, but then how does one stay true to the sentiment or the, the underlying nuance that gets communicated in Hindi, which English may not be able to capture?
See, so that's a tricky part. It's like being lost in translation. So that is an issue with research. When you are translating from one language to other, um, you will miss on certain aspects. Now, um, in order to reduce that loss, you can always complement it. As I said, one, of course, where you feel it's absolutely necessary and that translation into English is losing meaning completely, feel free to use Hindi. Use Hindi and then provide an English translation of it. But don't, just even in your report, it's okay. I feel, at least in research, that's what we do. If there are certain terminology, certain words that are used in Hindi that carry greater meaning and that which would be lost if it's used in English, then although I would translate it into English for the wider audience that I'm writing for, but I would not hesitate from writing it in Hindi as well in my report. That's one. The other is, uh, in your analysis, please make sure that you're able to give more details, more illustrations, more examples in order to put forward this meaning that is being lost in translation, right? But there is always this problem with research that um, your conclusions are always interpreted, right? So there is a double interpretation. At one level, people, in fact, not double, I would say multiple levels of interpretations that are happening in research where meaning gets distorted, and that's something that you cannot completely do away with. So one interpretation happens when people are interpreting events in their life. That is their interpretation. Then as a researcher, I interpret what they've told me and I write about it. And then my readers can also interpret what I have written, and that can be a different meaning, right? So the only way to be true as possible to what people have shared is, one, use native language where it's absolutely required, and in your analysis make sure to give more description, more meaning to what you're writing. I don't know if that helps.
That helps. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, somebody else also had a question. Okay.
We have a few questions in the chat box.
Okay.
I mean,
Yes.
should I read it out or will you see that?
Let me see. In case of sensitive topics like domestic violence, how encode question and how it encode answer from the field participation. So basically, you're saying, so encoding questions is, I'm assuming you're saying that for interviews, how do we do it? Is that the case, Pooja? How to do it interview? See, this is the thing. Now, that's a skill that has to be, gradually inculcated, where you learn how to ask these questions. And remember, you never ask direct questions. You never go and directly ask, has somebody abused you? Right? Does your husband hit you? Does your in-laws treat you badly? These are questions that you should not ask. That level of familiarity doesn't exist in the beginning. So the only way somebody would open up to you to start talking about all of these issues is very gradually over a period of time when they start trusting you, right? So never ask direct questions. You can always ask more generic questions about their life. just generally about their life, what is happening, what is going on, what do they do in their daily routines, what are some of the issues that they're facing, and let them respond. Mostly, when people start sharing their stories, these issues will emerge, right? And because you asked about domestic violence, I'll give you an instance where I was part of one of the projects in TIS where we were studying women domestic workers, and one of the questions as part of this project was to understand domestic violence, right? And again, in our naivety, we went with that interview schedule, and one of the question, it was not an interview schedule, it was a survey questionnaire, and one question was directly, you know, about domestic violence. Does somebody abuse you? Does somebody physically or sexually abuse you, right? And then we had listed down these family members, husband, in-laws, whatever, brother-in-law, mother-in-law, whatever. And we did start this survey, and for every answer that we got was a no, right? Until, and we were doing this interview in a group. Basically, a lot of people were sitting together. There were multiple interviewers who were there. So multiple people were asking questions to different people. And it's only, so we were like, we knew that it's not true, but then how do you justify it? How do you validate when the person in front of you is saying that, no, it doesn't happen? Until, for one of the cases, what happened is, this lady's friend was also sitting there, and she slightly nudged her and said, "Arey, kali to police aayi thi." Right? Just yesterday the police came because of this issue, and you're saying no, right? And they just cracked up and whatever, they started joking about what happened and things like that. But that's how these things unfold. Direct questions will never help you, right? You will have to find ways and means of going around. In our my parents keep telling me that don't hold your ear like this, go around and hold it like that. Don't ask direct questions. Wait for things to unfold. They will unfold. Be rest assured they will unfold, right? Now, there was one more question that I saw here. How can a researcher obtain consent when participating as covert? Now, this is a problem. See, when you're covert, you cannot seek permission, right? And this is where the question of ethics comes in. So a lot of people say, if you're doing a covert study, that's ethically wrong because you're not seeking consent, that you're hiding your identity, you're cheating your participants, which is true. But again, there is, flip side to this as well, where a lot of people argue that there are certain issues in our society which require attention, which require us to do research, but it's probably not feasible to do research without going covert, right? So that's again an ethical dilemma, whether you do or you don't do a covert study for safety purposes of your own self, for safety reasons of your participants. Some researchers do go covert, specifically when they're doing very sensitive issues that require attention, that require more knowledge, that require information to be shared and built up with the larger world. But you cannot do it without hiding your identity. So that's again, of course, an ethical issue, and everybody takes a different stand in that aspect. Okay. Naved has a question. Yes. Please go ahead, Naved.
Naved, first unmute yourself. I guess you are muted.
Okay, we can't hear you, Naved. Maybe you can try reconnecting this. I'll take the other question in the chat box. So Surya's asked if in interview method of data collection, how can a researcher demonstrate the authenticity and credibility of primary data and distinguish it from fabricated or falsified data in the absence of signed participant verification? Okay, so credibility of primary data and distinguish it from fabricated or falsified data. Now, okay, if I've got your question correctly, one, see, in this case, if as a researcher, one, I'm forging consent, then that's on me, right? Maybe people do it. People shouldn't do it. That's your moral standard, right? That's the end of it. If you think we should go, not you, I mean, if people think that they should go to any extent to collect data and forge, say suppose consent, then that's wrong, right? We do research for our self-interest. Nobody has called us to do research on them, right? So we have to be responsible. We have to be answerable to ourselves first, than anybody else. But in terms of false data, now, see, of course, not having correct information is one aspect, right? And as I said, we have data triangulation that works. So you can always triangulate data from other sources to see if it is true or not. But for me as a qualitative researcher, I just feel that, even if people are giving wrong information, it's okay. I am not so much caught up on whether that information is correct, authentic or not. But what I would be more interested in is trying to understand why are they lying, right? What is it that is leading people to fabricate a story? And you would usually see, even suppose some event has happened, right? And you talk to 10 people and there are 10 different stories and you don't know who's speaking the truth. The point is that nobody is lying, probably. It's everybody's different perspective in terms of how they've interpreted and understood that event. And that's enough for me. It doesn't have to be authentic in the sense that everybody has to say the same thing, right? So what interests me is that when people share stories, when people share events, when they talk about something, it's the underlying meaning that's of more interest than the actual fact. I don't know if that answers your query. But I mean, for me, at least, that's how I see it, right? You can triangulate your data, but the focus really has to be on why. Why are people doing this, right? And then you will see reasons. So a lot of people, when you do, interviews, would lie, for instance, if they realize that you're coming from a government office. They would underreport their incomes, or they would give false information. And there is a reason, right? There is a reason, because they expect that if they say, suppose, they come in a lower bracket of income, they might receive certain benefits. Similarly, for several other cases, you will see that there is always an underlying reason as to why people are saying certain things, right? Now, in participant observation, does the researcher have to take part in activities, or can they just observe and leave back? If you only observe, will it be called? No. If you're only observing, it's a pure observation. It's not participant observation. Participant observation means you have to participate, right? So in social sciences, we do not generally prefer an entirely purely observational method, because for several reasons. Most obvious reason being that we are dealing with human beings, right? And just because we do research doesn't accord us a greater position. So we have to give some level of co-evilness to people, right? And therefore, of course, it does help build strong rapport, but generally also we're not dealing with the subject of natural sciences. We're dealing with people, and we need to respect that. So generally, we don't recommend pure observation. Anybody else has question?
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
So, ma'am, I have actually, ma'am, two doubts regarding the IDI. The first is that previously, when I was working in a project, so I was supposed to conduct the interview, but I was working on perinatal health. So those interview were supposed to be very sensitive. So we were thinking about the location of the interview. So we figured out that either the interview is supposed to be conducted at home, or the facility, the health facility, or the in transit, or any other place like Chopal or etc. So we were not
Hmm.
sure that which we were not sure that what will work out for us. And
Mhm.
so I just wanted to know about it, that what in that situation what we are supposed to do. That's my first question. The second question is that when we were conducting the interview, because some
Mhm.
interviews take too much time, more than 1
Hmm.
hour or maybe 45 minutes.
Hmm.
Uh, so the participant were doing their house course, and they were doing all the things that what they are supposed to do in their house, and they were also answering the question. So is that
Hmm.
reliable, or what in that situation? What in interviewer should do?
Hmm. Okay. Now, quickly answer your second question first. See, uh, we spoke about time management yesterday, right? That you
Yes.
need to adjust your rhythm with the rhythm of the field, right? So, unfortunately, what happens, especially when we are working in project modes, when we have deadlines, right, to achieve, we are very short of time, right? And therefore, to be able to spend as much time as we'd like to is not possible. So in terms of reliability of data, even if people are multitasking and answering, that's okay, right? That
Okay.
doesn't mean just because people are working that they would necessarily give you wrong information, right? But it is always advisable that when you go to people, you should always seek prior consent in terms of when is it that they're available, right?
Yes.
The second aspect related to that is, for me, I feel that when people are working and then I'm, simultaneously when I'm talking to them, uh, I would personally would want to also start observation. What are
Yes.
they working? How are they working? What are they doing? Right now, so instead of having this very formal setup of where people actually are sitting in front of me and I'm having this one-to-one conversation, when people are working, there's so many other aspects that I am able to observe. Right, so it's more information for me. It's more insights for me, right? Rather than the data not being reliable per se.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that is not a problem. This first question that you had asked was, so how
About
do
the
you
location of the
how do
interview.
so see, again, this is tricky part. So as I said, not every location would be suitable, in especially when you're having certain sensitive topics. So you have to be mindful. So in case of your this thing, maybe you would want to engage with women, uh, not in their homes, but probably, say suppose in spaces that are only women. So say suppose you might want to have an interview with women uh, when a lot of women meet together, say suppose at in the evening, when they have this time off away from home, when they're sitting in a group, and it's at that point of time I might want to discuss with them. Or maybe through asha workers or in anganwadi centers, right? Spaces which are safer, or where women feel more comfortable in terms of discussing certain issues like this. Home may not be the most advisable place,
Yes.
right? Because there's thousand other people who are
Exactly.
observing or
Mm.
standing vigilant in terms of what this person is answering. So of course you will not get the best answers. So in that case, look for places where you feel, say suppose self-help group meetings, or as I said, if there is some meeting with the asha workers, or there is some place where women get together uh, every day, right? In that case, I feel it'll be better,
Yes.
right?
Yes, ma'am.
I hope that helps.
Yes, ma'am. That helps. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Anybody else has a question? Or okay, or is it time we have to wrap up?
I think it is time. But so what's the plan for the next weekend? I
Oh
mean, are
yes.
you going to teach or the sir will take it up?
So I didn't speak to him, but because he had reached out yesterday saying that he will not be available on 27th. So I
Mhm.
was thinking what we could do is let Professor Gupta come in and take coding and ATLAS.ti, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the next two sessions, coming Saturday and Sunday. And then maybe then I can come back on 27th.
And that would be great because he himself he wanted to teach some coding, theoretical part of coding
Correct.
also. So
Right.
okay, and so while this session and the questions they are putting in, what I was thinking that are you going to cover the ethics part also, because some of the questions are related to that directly, indirectly.
See, I did try to cover about ethics yesterday, but yes, if
Mm-hmm.
there are specific questions that people want to ask, I'm willing to answer them. I can see after the 2 sessions that Sir takes, because I think he might talk about ethics there as well. But
Mm-hmm.
depending on what you do in the next 2 sessions, we can then see what we do in the
Build on that.
last
Yes, sure, sure.
session, right?
Okay.
If ethics is something that people would want to discuss in more detail, we can think about it.
Because most of the questions directly, indirectly coming from that only. कि क्या करना है, क्या नहीं करना, what we are supposed to do in particular situation. And that's why in qualitative research the tools are very unstructured or semi-structured. So when you go in field, you evolve your questionnaires also, your tools also, the way you get receive responses.
True, but see, that's the thing with qualitative research. The beauty lies in being unstructured. The beauty lies in free flowing. Right? You're there to have a conversation. You're there to learn something. Research is fine, but you go with that attitude, right? So you can, unfortunately, you cannot box qualitative research. There are tools, but as I said, it's really about what unfolds on your ground. Anyway, we can, of course, have more discussion on this subsequently. I can help you with a couple of reading materials. So, in fact, let me just write. One of these books that I have.
Yeah, because we are getting a constant request on that, some reading material or some book, if you can suggest to them.
So this
I
is
mean,
one book.
I have some list of book. We'll share with them. But if you
Okay.
have any of that,
See, this is a handbook on social research methods that a lot of social researchers do use. It's called Social Research Methods by Alan